Welcome to the Globetrottin ADs. This podcast is for you, athletic directors, activity coordinators, coaches, and program associates based in international schools around the world. The Globetrottin ADs is proudly hosted by Nick DeForest from the American International School Vienna and Matt Fleming from the American International School of Budapest. Here they are now, Nick and Matt and the Globetrottin ADs.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Globetrottin ADs. We are in the home stretch of the 22-23 school year, and with that, we're in the home stretch of our podcast schedule as well. Today, we have a special guest. We're going to dive into a little bit about the world of recruiting and looking for jobs overseas. Our guest today is Brian Lettinga. He's from Search Associates, so he's going to give some tips and the process of what it's like to start your career overseas. So we're going to go through that, and he's got some really good information if you're interested in that area, or if you're interested in maybe moving on from your current location in the near future. I think this will be a good value for that. But before we get into talking with Brian, I'm going to say hey to Nick over in Vienna. He's coming off freshly off of his last tournament of the season, the IST High School Girls Softball Tournament. So how's it going, Nick? How you feeling? A little relieved?
Yeah, I mean, wrapping up the year, right? Tournaments end. They don't always end the way you want them to as a coach or a player, but they're great. They're always great. So really excited about some in-person banquets happening over here next week. I'm sure a lot of schools around the world are as well, coming out of COVID. Really excited to have our last episode of the year with a guest. You and I will do one afterwards to kind of wrap it up, but really excited to have Brian on here. It's something that people ask us about all the time, how to get started overseas, especially a lot of our U.S. listeners and U.S. friends. They think we have the world on our fingertips over here in Europe, at least, and they're always interested. So we thought this would be a great way to help that out, help people along. So Brian, thanks for being here and welcome.
Super excited. Thank you, too, for having me on the show. This is a great time in the cycle of looking for international jobs to kind of put everything in a row and start to think about how you might find your first or next job overseas. As we kind of wind down the school year, recruiting tends to wind down as well. And then it kind of bleeds into the summer where stateside folks are really starting to think about if they want to go overseas. So this is perfect timing, and I appreciate you two having me on.
Awesome. Well, that's great. That's what we want. Before we get into the ins and outs and things like that, just let our listeners know a little bit about yourself and Search Associates in general, please.
Sure. So my career spans about 25 years overseas. I used Search Associates along with other organizations. There's other organizations like Search, primarily Search. I got into international teaching because my father-in-law was an international teacher, and he was actually one of John Magana's, the founder of Search Associates, first associates ever placed. Paul Paulson is his name. He's a great guy. He lives here in Michigan now, but he spent his career in Taiwan and Japan American School and kind of across Asia before he came back. But he kind of lit the fire, for myself and my wife to get interested in teaching overseas. So we left Michigan back in 95, and we first landed on a small little island called Saipan in the middle of the Pacific. We worked there for 3 years. After that, we finally got our way into Search Associates because, there is a vetting system, and it's not the greatest match for people that have never taught overseas or who've never really had their own classroom of learners. So we did move into Search after those first 3 years, and then Search placed us in Caracas, Venezuela. Then Search placed us in Nairobi, Kenya. Our kids were born in Kenya. Then we moved back to Caracas. Search was involved with that. It was an admin post. I moved out of the classroom and then into Serbia in Belgrade. And that was another Search post. And that's where I met Matt through the CISO organization, through the connections and how close those Eastern European schools are, and then finished overseas time at WBAIS in Tel Aviv, in Israel, and another search assisted kind of placement for us. And since then, I've been back here in the States. This is year 3, the position of senior associates, in which I hold. Helps place teachers all over the world. I consult with schools and visit schools that we work with. The position became available. I applied for it, and lo and behold, we got the job. So it was lucky that we had a house in Michigan. That was one of the criteria. So we packed up and moved our kids to the United States. So they're here trying to repatriate and learn what it's like to live in a new country, because they've never spent time in the States.
Very cool. That's a great background, and varied background. You've been allowed a lot of different places, a lot of different types of schools. It's interesting you said Saipan, because that's actually one of the first places I interviewed with a long time ago, like back in the early or mid 90s as well, when I was first looking to go overseas. It didn't work out, but that's what really got me interested in looking out and what could be available or what could be possible in the world, because I thought it was a really cool, interesting place in the middle of nowhere, little tiny island.
This is in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
I think it's 11 miles long and 6 miles wide. We have a school there also. So I get to talk with folks that are over at the international school.
So with that in mind, with jobs, and they're out there, more specifically with like Nick and I do with AD and PE jobs, more specifically, we're working with PE staff. About how many jobs typically come up for ADs and for PE folks throughout the year?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that kind of has an ebb and flow from year to year, obviously. I have always looked at, PE in a similar space with the numbers of openings as an admin position, because there's only going to be 1 or 2 PE positions, or 3 maximum, depending on the size of the school. So when they do come up, it's kind of everybody's in, right? It's super competitive when there's only a few positions available. So, so some numbers over the last couple years I pulled, just to give people an idea. So last year, 112 PE positions were filled through search. That doesn't mean there weren't more than that. Not everybody uses search associates, obviously. So there's way more PE positions out there. That just came through us, and 18 AD positions. So, that's the mid-level admin post. And when candidates come from the United States, their AD background tends to be quite big, right? Some of them are managing districts of 2,400 kids and 12 traveling teams at one season. They don't necessarily do the hosting like they do in some overseas schools, but they're certainly setting up tournaments and trying to get their feet wet. There's going to be positions. So this year we're at 105, and we're still in the hiring season with 13 ADs. So there's a few different trends in there if you guys are interested in hearing those as well.
Yeah, I think it's, but just to stay on, like you mentioned, the USAD coming overseas, those 18 or 13 positions that I've hired, do you know if they're international already and just moving international, or brand new to the international?
I did not pull that data. Yeah. So it's a great question if those were brand new this year or if they were some moving in and out, because as search associates build its brand, in the States, more and more ADs will be looking to move overseas, and the market for overseas teachers is just expanding, every year, vastly across the world. So, Matt was talking about Saipan back in the mid 90s. So that was kind of the Wild West when it was all paper, like you wrote in your documents to search associate and you sent it to John Magana, and you hope it got there, and you hope you got a letter back that said you were accepted into the group. And now it's just boop, beep, bop, 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 bop. You can get anything figured out in 24 hours. You can get someone hired and scan the database and look for these candidates. But
Right.
every year it's different. We're placing PE teachers out of the states, replacing teachers out of the states all the time, and ADs is just going to fall into that regularity. The more often schools open up and look for ADs.
Yeah.
Sure.
And what about this time of the year? There's still jobs open, like you said, so the last minute. But if someone's just thinking about, hey, I'm not ready now, but maybe next year or the year after, is this a good time for them to start figuring out what Search Associates is like and how it can help them?
Yeah, this is a good time to start taking a peek at the positions. There are positions that still need to be filled, for this year. And there'll probably be a few more. There's always different circumstances at different schools that allow for, oh my gosh, we have an influx of kids. We need to grow the PE department because we're adding these 3 sections. So we'll look for teachers now. Or, there's an unfortunate accident in a teacher's life and they need to go home. So some of those are happening now, but the real cycle of looking for positions, like competitive cycle, is generally mid-September, all the way through May is pretty competitive. As you hit May, it starts to slow down with hiring, especially some of the more popular schools. When I say popular, I say those are in cities and regions where people, tend to want to go to because they know.
Well, thinking back to my college days when I was looking for a college, you as a kid, you hear, that name of that college and that name of that. So just like that, this city's name or that city's names, but there's tons of other schools and jobs out there in areas of the world that you would never think of, right?
Yeah. And on our webpage, there's an interactive map that is updated every year. So if someone were to think about wanting to live overseas, you could go to our webpage, www.searchassociates.com, and click on the space at the top of the webpage. There's a banner and you can go to our schools, and it's an interactive map. You can hover over any country you want, click it, and then it will show you the names of the schools that we work with. They're not live links. They become live when you're an active candidate, and then you can go directly to that school and see the positions that they have available. So that is 100% happening. But, there's other ways to find international teaching jobs too. Not all schools use our services.
That's cool how the technology has changed how people can go about the search process and looking into jobs out there. I can remember looking through a catalog that was about an inch thick, and there were no pictures. It was just data that said where the school is located, what the population was, what the makeup of the school kind of was, and enrollment and what. So that I don't want to date ourselves. You talk about earlier about an application. I hope it got there, but
sure.
Especially I think from COVID, how things change with interview process, and now a lot of stuff's done online. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, about how stuff is done. Are interviews done online more often now, or is there still the fairs people should be trying to go to, or what are the trends in that regard in terms of actually physically or not physically going to a search for a job?
Sure. COVID certainly hit the international teaching market the way it did the regular in-person teaching market in the States or anywhere else. So looking for jobs has always been through the database. So candidates have always been looking for jobs that way. The job fairs, definitely we stepped away from that, but they are all back live. Search Associates fairs are all now back live during the COVID span of 2 years, 3 years, even into this year. We still had a few virtual fairs where candidates would sign up and the schools would sign up at the same time, and they would meet in this virtual space that we had created for the event to take place. So going forward into the new year, all our fairs are posted now on our website. They're going to be open and in person again. We're starting to see numbers trending up. Other organizations, I'm sure, are seeing the same trend. Is going to the site is what we hear. The feedback we hear from heads of schools are They like to meet with candidates. They like to have that face-to-face interaction. They want to see the person in person and have that conversation. Although, there's it's not going to go away. It just has a different name, and now it's Zoom or Meet.
Yeah.
When I was going through it, 10 years ago, it just everything was on Skype, right?
Yeah.
So give me your Skype and we'll Skype, blah, blah, blah. But now it's just, there's so many different ways to meet. And I'd say probably this year's Cambridge Fair is our flagship fair.
Okay.
We were probably close to 60-65% of the candidates that got jobs at the fair or closely related to the fair. Fair is a great way to get hired because the teachers that go there are ready to sign contracts. That's why they're going, and the schools that are there are ready to hire on the spot.
Oh, wow.
And they leave with contracts after the period of time. So those are coming back 100%, and the more the better.
Great. And I just looked at that next year, I guess, because it's 2024 is Cambridge in January, and then San Francisco not too long in February after that. So for the Americans listening, start looking on the website for more information, and then there's some time to plan for maybe an in-person trip to Cambridge or San Francisco.
Yeah, and those are both well-attended, conferences. Cambridge is the first and the biggest of all the search fairs historically. Mm-hmm. San Francisco manages and grabs everybody kind of on the West Coast. It's just I think what you said a couple days later or a week later, Nick.
Yeah.
So anyone in the States, that's the place if you're not getting traction through direct contact, because a lot of teachers find that, they'll get their traction first through the Zoom interviews and will get hired even through the process. And then we have these fairs where it's the bulk of the work gets done, for the schools. They're going there to hire 10, 8, 12 people any one year.
Well, you hinted at it, that you're not the only one out there. And I, like probably all the people interested in this, am an absolute rookie at getting jobs overseas. I'm 18 years at my school, and I was in Vienna before for another reason. So I've never had to look for a job, only was here in person. But what, not to list all the other competitors, but what are some of the other ways, or are there other big organizations out there?
Absolutely. I mean, the older folks that are doing just a straight search in the States, if you're in the United States right now and you're looking and you're just doing your Google blast of where to find, you're going to come across Schroll, ISS, you're going to come across TIE, the International Educator, you're going to come across probably Dave's ESL Cafe, you're going to probably come across Teachaway, which is another newer group coming up. Dave Fry runs that one. So there's lots of different ways, and there's other spaces like Teacher Horizons and the Times Educational Supplement, TES, and they almost work more like a job board where you'll see a position and you kind of just start to communicate with them. Mm-hmm. The bigger difference, or the best and biggest difference between search associates and these other groups, is the personal attention that you'll get working with search associates. We have 19 senior associates all over the world managing offices. I happen to work here in the state, managing 21 different states. So candidates that kind of come through my territory end up in my office. We'll have a Zoom. We talk about the resumes. I walk them through the process. I give them tips on how to improve that resume. We talk a little bit about timing. They might get an offer. I'll read offers. I read contracts. I read benefit packages. Mm-hmm. We give them that attention that they might not get at some of the other organizations. Everybody's search is going to look different. Yeah. I'm a proponent of international education, and if you're looking for a job overseas, you need to kind of have your stove full of pots boiling, because it's hard work to find that first job overseas because the market is super competitive.
Right. Sure is. You were talking earlier before the show about trends, current trends that are happening out there and what's make people, I guess, more attractive as candidates, or more sets them apart. And I'm sure coaching's a part of that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what are some of the trends you're seeing, maybe, and if you can, maybe more specifically towards athletic directors, activity coordinators, folks in our kind of end of the building, so to speak?
Yeah, and we had quite a few PE positions, posted this year. So those listening in the States, there are over 300 PE posts that kind of got listed out, through search, and several AD ones as well. Like I mentioned, we've already seen 13 hired this year, and we're still finishing up the season. But this flexibility piece that you're talking about, Matt, and the trend is PE teachers that are bringing another skill set alongside, whether it's aquatics director or it's having some coaching skills. More importantly, it's another teaching skill set that you might be able to have. You're going to see PE connected with wellness, 100%. You're going to see PE connected to yoga. We're starting to see PE connected to single subject content spaces like English and music and math. So don't be afraid to highlight those other skill sets, when you're creating your profile with search associates or building your resume. People that can be a little more flexible and fluid are going to find that they're going to get more traction because they can fit the puzzle in a better way. And you two know as well as I know is that in the world of international education, it's about fitting the puzzle. It's the fit. Are you the right fit? And now you need to be like water with your fit. You need to freeze when it's cold and frozen and evaporate when it's hot. You got to fill all the spaces when it's moving. So the more you can add to a school, the more likely the fit's going to work.
Just a question about that too, is like an area that I'm kind of familiar with, outdoor education. Are you seeing much with outdoor education? Are more jobs opening up in that field in international schools?
It's a trend that's starting to happen more. Don't have the data, that would suggest that there's more than in the past. I just see those positions posting more. So that tells me that more and more schools are moving in that direction. The coaching piece is definitely always going to be there. It's a little bit different overseas, as you two have probably talked about on the show quite a bit, than it is in the States. Mm-hmm. Not all the coachable sport or activities are really there, but that activities director is a real thing, and that's starting to separate from ADs even. So there's an athletic director now overseas, and there's an activities director at the same school, and probably someone managing the pool if there's a pool, and subdividing all those pieces up so people have a little more flexibility.
Yeah. Well, that's positive, I think, for us to hear, because we work with folks who wear both hats. They got to be the AD and the activities coordinator. It's depending on the size of the school, it's a lot to handle. And I think the nature of both of those programs have changed quite a bit over the years, and even in national schools with the focus and the philosophy of how things are done. So hopefully we'll see more of those separated posts out there down the road, because I think in the end it's going to be better for schools, of course, when they can put more focus, or one person in a job that's leading those programs.
Yeah, and that's for sure, Matt. The same with wellness. A director of wellness is becoming a more and more popular position in the schools overseas. And you're correct when you talked about the size of the school. A school of 400, 500 and below, people are going to be doing multiple jobs, right? They're going to have several hats. Oh, yeah. As soon as you hit about 800 or 900, then it starts to be, divided up a little bit. Absolutely. Never going to be a shortage of PE teachers and, coaches. Those positions come up regularly with search associates and everywhere around.
Well, let me ask you about just specifically about the coaches, because you mentioned it, obviously padding your resume, as I was, putting down everything that you can do. And, us as ADs, we've talked about this often, of asking our administrators when they interview someone, ask them about what they want to do outside of the classroom. ask some of these questions, or please, we need some more coaches, see what these guys are interested in. So we're asking for that. And if it's a good idea to get it on the resume for people out there, are people in the interviews asking that? Like, are directors and principals hiring someone that writes on there, I want to be a soccer coach as well as teach English?
Yeah, that's going to be up really, Nick, to the director and how that filters into their need, right? Again, trying to fit the puzzle. On our profile, where candidates create their profile with our organization, there is a space specifically for coaching. They can choose 4 items or 4 sports that they feel comfortable coaching. And there's a huge long list. Also, right underneath that is a section of what activities can you sponsor, and they can list out all those. On top of that, in general, candidates are putting on their like a section on their resume called professional skill set or core competencies or coaching experiences, and they'll get those onto the resume. But for sure, when I'm talking with PE teachers or ADs or administrators about building a profile and looking at their resumes, I'm encouraging them always to put on what they can coach, because you never know what that connection is going to be. And if the head of school knows they need a soccer coach and they're interviewing someone and it fits, the match is there, obviously they'll go for the 2-for-1, opposed to just the straightforward content.
Yeah, no, that's great that there's a section specifically for that. That's great to hear for, someone wanting to get a job, and for us, so that the info's there for our principals and directors, right? Great.
Yeah, and if any ADs out there listening overseas, and you find yourself in that middle management role and you're involved in screening candidates, it's right in the profile. If you're looking at search associates and you're looking at candidates, you can go into the profile and you can look right on their profile and see what they can coach and what they can offer as after-school activities. It's all there for everybody.
And then it's just fingers crossed that once they get to your school, they'll actually want to coach and not say they're too busy or they want to experience life in Europe first. Or no, I'm joking, of course, but yeah. Brian, I think this is great. Some great info about how it works, how the setup is behind the scenes. A little bit of some competitors and how Search Associates stands out, which I find really important if you want to go overseas, that you have a bit of a personal touch. It could be crazy to think of someone that's maybe never left the U.S. is going to accept a job in Mongolia, and just to do it through a website or something and not have a bit of a personal touch. So I think that's great to hear.
Yeah, we're happy to help. And like I said, we have candidates from all over the world. I know this podcast has an outreaching listenership. So if you're in a PE position or in an AD position and you're thinking about moving on, obviously we would encourage you to have a stop at searchassociates.com and read a little bit about us. If you're in the United States, for sure you wanted to get in touch with us, read up on us. We have some FAQs on our webpage. You can take a look at that interactive map and just see where schools are. There's nothing wrong with being curious to international teaching and only wanting to work in one region. Just our suggestion is always, if your ultimate goal is to start to live the expat life, or even dip your toe into the expat life waters for 2 or 3 years, is to throw that wide net and look at all the schools internationally and think about how that might just be the start of a chess match. You may not get that first job you want, but perhaps that first move is the pawn, and that's going to open up, your next move 3 years down to a different school. It's getting the experience. And we know through our own records and through our own hiring practices and the data that we collect, that the candidates with the most success that come through Search Associates have a few years of experience, specifically in their content areas, and that have a teacher certification and or license from their host country or from the state, that they're coming out of. So that's the starting point for all you listeners, as if you meet those criteria, you will have some success in traction. And like I said, the summer is a good time to build those profiles. You need to get references. You got to work on the resume, and then get in the search, by September, when you can really start seeing those numbers. If we had over 300 this year, trends tell us that there'll be about that many, next year. So there's spaces to be filled.
Awesome.
Thanks for sharing the ins and outs of this process. And we hope that somebody out there is listening will benefit from this and has a good pathway forward for investigating even more, or maybe signing up with Search Associates and leading to a job down the road overseas and experiencing the wonderful world of what it's like to work in these schools and live overseas and experience this lifestyle. So thanks a lot for all the info, Brian, and look forward to meeting up with you again somewhere down the road, maybe another CISA conference or something like that.
Yep, for sure. Thank you, guys. And maybe in the fall we get together and we can look at some live data, the data that's out there at that time about PE teachers and what the trends look like. And however you want to do it, I'm here happy to support what you guys are, the messages that you're spreading, and happy to join whenever you need any.
Sounds great. We will have you back for sure. Special thanks to Search Associates, who have also sponsored this podcast episode. Search Associates have been placing teachers abroad for over 30 years, with PE and AD openings each and every year. Be sure to visit www.searchassociates.com to learn more about teaching and living abroad.
Until next week, this has been another episode of the Globetrottin ADs.